Filmstudie is an early abstract experimental film created by Hans Richter. The short piece contains images of shifting geometric shapes, ambiguous avant-garde footage, flying and swiveling eyeballs, and the repeated images of this woman's face. We see a lot of raw experimentation with lighting, movement, and superimposition. After viewing the piece, we may ask ourselves, what is the meaning of this short film? Our desperate search for a connection or formula to find a clear meaning will fall short, as is the point of this film being not only an experimental work, but an abstraction as well.
First, we're going to start off with a description of what abstract filmmaking is.
Experimental filmmaking is a discipline that explores alternative technique to conveying non-narrative forms of filmmaking. It offers a reevaluation of traditional cinematic conventions. Abstract filmmaking is a subgenre of experimental. Abstract films are non-narrative visual sound experiences with no story and no acting. Instead, abstract films seek to present the rawness of certain filmic elements. Abstract form is an exploration of cinematic conventions.
Secondly, mise-en-scène.
In this film, we notice that mise-en-scene elements are very limited. Well, aside from all the floating eyes, there is a lack of external elements in the mise-en-scene. There weren't many objects used in making this film. Instead, the film relies on using editing techniques to convey the style. There are many contrasting shapes of black and white, which led us to believe that this is a motif of this film. The theme of black and white can be seen in the eyes, or in the white lines and shapes that are in the black background. And to highlight all of that, the film uses low-key front lighting to give the frame less depth and help isolate the subject.
Next, cinematography.
While Filmstudie is an early experimental film, it uses a lot of cinematography tools that are still used in film today. One of the most prominent techniques used is superimposition. Superimposition happens when two images are put over each other in a frame, allowing the viewer to see both things happening at once. In this film, superimposition is used to create an abstract connection between the woman and the eyeballs, and also to create the illusion that there's more than one woman. Superimposition is still used in modern film, like in this shot from Kill Bill Volume 1. Another cinematography technique used is the eye-level framing of the woman. Eye-level or head-on framing is used to make viewers feel more connected to a subject on camera and makes us view them in a more neutral way, as opposed to a high or low-level shot. Another thing that's really interesting about this film's cinematography is a lack of camera movement. While things in different shots move in and out of the frame, the camera stays completely still. This and the use of non-symmetry in some shots help to slightly unsettle the viewer, which may or may not have been Hans Richter's intention.
Next, editing and sound.
While the film doesn't contain any sound effects, it does have a wide variety of brass and percussion instruments playing in the background. This music gives off a very intense, mysterious, and suspenseful theme to all the images shown. Probably one of the most notable things about this film is the editing. There are many scenes that use a superimposition technique. The artist also loves to catch our attention by flashing shots of the moving eyeballs across the screen, and then cutting to some shots of different shapes, such as moving circles and rectangles, as well as some very stylistic cone shapes moving back and forth that almost looks like Hollywood spotlights.
Finally, structure.
As an abstract experimental film, there is no focus on creating structure, and instead we believe that this film was most likely created as a session of experimenting for filmmaking technique when filmmaking was still a relatively new medium. In 1925, many processes were still undiscovered and unrefined. When watching Filmstudie, we see style experimentation in the way that shots show affinity through editing, but contain no story or plot, such as in the composition of these two shots. Or the affinity of movement in these two shots.
Next, do abstract experimental films hold relevance? Particularly, does this film have relevance in modern filmmaking?
The film has historical relevance in that it utilizes an assortment of techniques, and was one of the first films to explore these techniques. But we will say that Filmstudie holds little impactful relevance to filmmaking today. What we define as relevance is decided through determining meanings that viewers derive from the film. There is referential meaning, explicit meaning, implicit meaning, and symptomatic meaning.
Referential meaning. The film displays and makes use of geometric shapes to form abstract moving pictures.
Explicit meaning. The film shows images of a woman and the shapes that are perceived around her.
Implicit meaning. Following the theory of cinema, we perceive that the juxtaposition between the woman and the geometric shape shows that the two subjects share a relationship in some way. This follows the theory of the Kuleshov effect, in which the viewer's perception of an image is shaped by their recollection of previous images. All meanings derived in this way is up to the interpretation of the viewer.
Symptomatic meaning. This film plays into the discovery of newer concepts around the birth of narrative filmmaking.
Abstract films often present a critique of society, such as with An Andalusian Dog, a surrealist avant-garde film which offers a critique into religion and bourgeois morality. Or in Meshes of the Afternoon, in that it critiques the validity of our perception of events in reality. Or in Bruce Conner's A Movie, in which the film compiles found footage from various sources to critique the state of society and hint at its inevitable self-destruction. The point of the abstract form is to make content without intending meaning behind it, either in an effort to simply make a piece of work without the prospect of meaning, or by intending the viewer to find their own meaning in the artwork. Many artists across mediums from film to painting to sculpture have taken on this stance towards the form. However, any analysis that can be given on an abstract piece of work is a bit shifty, because the point of creating the piece is to reject conforming to story plot, connectivity, and explicit meaning.
In our own views, it is very difficult to understand the intended meaning behind this short film. We have no way of knowing the intentions of the filmmaker, nor do we have a formal explanation of the filmmaker justifying his work with any meaning or relevance. That is why we must say that a piece can only be evaluated based on its perceived implicit meaning, which is a perception taken on entirely by the audience. That is to say that in this case, and in most cases, the auteur's own view on the piece of work does not matter in any significant sense after that piece of work has been seen by an audience. Hans Richter has contributed his share into the world of abstract experimental filmmaking.